What's going on, everyone, and welcome into Plaisance Podcast, filled to the brim with glitchy analysis and freezing cold takes, so cold that they're boiling hot. Today's episode, we are going to continue our college football preview, and we're going to be previewing the South Carolina Gamecocks football season. Let's get right into it with the stars. At running back on offense, we've got Raheem Sanders. This is going to be the guy who the ball goes through on this offense. You've got a younger quarterback, an aging but not so talented skill position group. But Raheem Sanders, a transfer from Arkansas, man, he is going to be the guy for this Arkansas team. I'm expecting at least 100 touches, if not 200, and at least 1,000 rushing yards, if not like 13, 14, 1,500. This is going to be the bell cow back, first, second, third down, doesn't matter. He'll get the rock. So keep an eye out for Raheem Sanders on the defensive side of the ball. Another Sanders, TJ Sanders. He is going to be the enforcer on this defense. If they're going to succeed, especially later in the game when teams start to run the football, TJ Sanders, the defensive tackle, is going to be your guy to take a look at. So now let's talk about a storyline or two, some key additions and losses, and then we'll get into the record prediction. First storyline I want to talk about is more of a question. Is Beamer ball working? Now, in 2022 with Spencer Rattler, South Carolina beat Tennessee, Clemson. They showed a lot of promise in their bowl game. There was a lot of hope going into last year, but they underperformed to a degree that would raise some major questions on whether or not this is a sustainable way to run a football team. I personally like Shane Beamer. In the world of college football personalities, I think he fits the mold well. However, sometimes when you have a head coach that makes his personality like the forefront of the team, kind of like Dabo Swinney has been doing over the last 5 to 6 years, you run out of juice and you run out of ways to sell your team outside of just look how cool your head coach is. So I think that there are some questions going into this season on whether or not Shane Beamer is going to keep his job at the end of this year. That's something to look at, especially when I get to the record prediction. So now let's get into the key losses and additions for this team. The losses side of things. We have Xavier Legette. He gets drafted to the Carolina Panthers. One of the coolest accents I've ever seen, but the leading receiver for the South Carolina Gamecocks team last year. And then the guy throwing him the ball, Spencer Rattler, also gets drafted to the New Orleans Saints. He is somebody that you want to pay attention to for being a gem in this past year's draft, but nonetheless, both of these guys, major contributors over the last couple years to South Carolina. I think they're going to be massive losses. Now, on the addition side of things, I've already talked about Raheem Sanders from Arkansas. He was a 400-yard back last year, but he missed a ton of time. I think he's going to be a massive addition to this offense. And then Kyle Kennard, an edge rusher from Georgia Tech. He was their leader in sacks last season, and I think he's going to do the exact same thing this year for South Carolina. I think those are two big additions, but the real question is going to come with this relatively young offense. I said that the skill position group is pretty old, but the offensive line and the quarterback, Lenoris Sellers, relatively young. He's a redshirt freshman, and this offense is going to have to grow through him regardless of who is the head coach this year, next year, and the next. Lenoris Sellers is one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country right now. I mean, he's got an awesome build. A lot of people have been comparing him to Cam Newton. As a matter of fact, I think Cam Newton has been playing college football 25 and specifically playing South Carolina with Lenoris Sellers. But anyways, it's going to be really imperative to develop him this year because South Carolina obviously wants to be competitive. This might not be the year to do it, but the next season and the next, those are always the goals if you can't compete in the year you're currently in. So now, without further ado, let's get into the record prediction. But first, let's talk about South Carolina's hinge game, and that is Game 2 at Kentucky. I think this is going to be a very tough game considering all of these things. It's on the road. It's versus Kentucky, and I think they're very talented, and it's very early on in the season with a young quarterback. I think if South Carolina can win this game, Shane Beamer can win enough to keep his job. But if South Carolina loses, the rest of the schedule is kind of tough, and I don't see the wins on the sheet to let Shane Beamer stick around. So now, without further ado, let's get into the record prediction. All right, game 1 versus Old Dominion. We don't have to talk about it. I say that every time just because it's very obvious. South Carolina will not lose to Old Dominion. That's a win. At Kentucky, I think Kentucky's defense is extremely talented, especially their front seven. They're going to do a great job of stopping Raheem Sanders and putting the ball in Lenore Sellers' hands. I don't think that's a good win combination, especially in the first part of the season, so I have to give them a loss here. Versus LSU at home, I think LSU's got way too much talent compared to what South Carolina's at right now. Even though it's at home, I give them a loss here. Then Akron, another easy pickup win. Kind of boost the spirits, 2-2. Then you host Ole Miss. I think that's a loss. You travel to Alabama. Absolutely zero chance South Carolina is winning in Bryant-Denny Stadium. If somebody could comment down in the comments, when's the last time that South Carolina traveled to Bryant-Denny Stadium and won a football game, that would be great. I don't think it's happened in the last 30 years, but I definitely could be mistaken there. Next, you got at Oklahoma, similar to Alabama, but to a lesser extent. I think Oklahoma's home field advantage is really, really good, and I do think Oklahoma's got like a top 5 defense in college football. That's not a good combination for a young quarterback. I give them the loss there. Hosting Texas A&M, I think A&M, like LSU, Alabama, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, regardless of whether or not you're playing them on the road or at home, it's going to be a loss either way. Then you go to at Vanderbilt, worst roster in the SEC, not a SEC contender, not really an SEC competitive team. I think you can get the win there. Then you host Missouri. I think Missouri's offense is extremely explosive. South Carolina's is not at the moment, and so I have to give the edge, especially in a shootout, to the team with the better quarterback currently and definitely the best wide receiver in all of college football, Luther Burden III. That's a loss for South Carolina. Hosting Wofford, easy win, FCS team, chalk it up. And then at Clemson, I think Clemson is much improved from last season, especially with Cade Klubnik having a whole year of experience under his belt. Lenore Sellers will start to look like the ultimate dual threat that he is, but I still give this edge to Clemson because of the home field advantage. So 4-8. Stability is so important to me, and while I like Shane Beamer, I can see it both ways, especially after a 4-8 season. I understand letting him go after this year. I mean, you had a drop off, I think 9-4. I think South Carolina either went 7-5 or 5-7 last year, which is really disappointing. And then this year to go 4-8, massive drop off from a couple of years ago, and a huge change in momentum. I understand letting go of Shane Beamer, but I do want to say I am a fan of his. I think he's a good coach, especially a good recruiter and a good motivator. So keeping him around, not such a bad idea, especially with such a young, impressionable quarterback like Lenore Sellers. But that's going to do it for my South Carolina preview. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Next episode, we're going to get into Tennessee. So once again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.